October 1940. The skies above Britain are on fire. Night after night, the thunder of bombs drowns out sleep, and the orange glow of burning cities paints the horizon. Yet, amid this, one man stands before his people with a message of defiance, courage, and hope. His name is Winston Churchill. At a time when the nation's future hung by a thread, Churchill did not just lead the war effort, he became the beating heart of British resilience. On October 9th, he officially took leadership of the Conservative Party, uniting political factions that had once doubted him. It was not an easy victory. Many within his own ranks had once considered him reckless, too outspoken, too unpredictable. But when the storm of war engulfed Europe, it was precisely that fire his unshakable will that Britain needed most. Keep calm and carry on. It was not just a slogan printed on posters, it was a reflection of a national spirit that refused to be broken. As bombs rained down over London, Liverpool, and Coventry, ordinary men and women carried on with their lives. They swept shattered glass from shop windows, went to work in the morning, and queued calmly for rations. They refused to surrender their dignity to fear. This is the story of that spirit, the courage of a nation under siege, and the man who gave it voice. Behind every air raid siren, every blackout curtain, and every headline of destruction, there were millions of quiet acts of heroism. Housewives making tea by candlelight, children sheltering in underground stations, firemen racing through rubble to save strangers. Together, they embodied Churchill's words, "We shall never surrender." In this video, we will step into that world, into the heart of the Blitz. We will see how Britain's leaders fought not only on the battlefield but also in the minds and hearts of their people. We will uncover the strategies that shaped history, and the human stories that kept hope alive when the world seemed to be falling apart. If you are passionate about history, about the strength of ordinary people in extraordinary times, then you are in the right place. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications. Each week, we bring you new stories of resilience, leadership, and the hidden moments that changed the course of history. Now take a deep breath, dim the lights, and imagine the sound of sirens echoing through the night. Because tonight, we return to 1940, to a time when courage was not just found on the front lines, but in every home across Britain. As the autumn winds swept across Britain in October 1940, the relentless roar of German bombers had become a nightly terror. Yet beneath the blacked-out skies, a remarkable resilience had taken hold. The British people, from the bustling streets of London to the industrial ports of Liverpool, had adapted to life under constant threat. Families huddled in shelters, children clutched by anxious hands, and workers navigated shattered streets to reach factories essential for the war effort. Amid this, political and military leaders grappled with the unfolding reality of the Luftwaffe's campaign. And for the first time, a measure of clarity began to emerge in the fog of war. October 12th, 1940, marked a turning point. A quiet yet profound acknowledgement from the German High Command that their grand designs for an immediate invasion of Britain would not come to fruition. The plan, known as Operation Sea Lion, had once loomed as an imminent threat over the Channel, promising to bring the full force of the Third Reich to British shores. Yet, the reality of the skies above Britain had shattered their expectations. Fighter Command, though heavily outnumbered, had mounted a defense that not only surprised the Germans but fundamentally altered the trajectory of the conflict. Pilots engaged in dogfights over the clouds, their small squadrons maneuvering with skill and tenacity against waves of bombers, and radar stations along the coast provided a nascent yet invaluable advantage, allowing British fighters to intercept attacks with greater precision. In this context, The decision to postpone the invasion until at least the following spring was both a strategic necessity and a tacit admission of failure. Hitler and his advisers had underestimated the effectiveness of Britain's air defenses and the unwavering determination of its people. They had assumed that relentless bombing campaigns would fracture morale, force surrender, and prepare the way for a swift ground invasion. But the reality proved starkly different. Communities refused to crumble under pressure. Instead, they found ways to maintain daily routines amidst the ruins. Children played in the rubble-strewn streets. Shopkeepers reopened their stores despite shattered windows. And the population collectively asserted an extraordinary sense of normalcy in defiance of terror. This delay also signaled a broader shift in German strategy. With the prospect of a quick victory over Britain fading, Hitler's attention began to turn eastward, toward the Soviet Union. The postponement of Operation Sea Lion was not merely a pause. It was an acknowledgement that Britain could not be subdued through air power alone, and that the next phase of the war would require recalibration on multiple fronts. Meanwhile, the ongoing aerial bombardments continued, now with the primary aim of psychological pressure rather than tactical conquest. As German planners clung to the hope that the terror inflicted on civilians might still erode the nation's will to resist. Yet the British response demonstrated the remarkable adaptability of a society under siege. From the East End of London to the suburbs of Manchester, people developed intricate routines to cope with the nightly air raids. Blackout curtains and sandbagged shelters became part of daily life, while local communities organized support networks to ensure that those displaced by bombing or those in need of basic provisions were not left behind. Volunteers, from firefighters to civil defense workers, risked their lives to maintain order, extinguish fires, and rescue those trapped beneath the rubble. Even as German bombs struck indiscriminately, Britain's collective response reinforced a sense of solidarity that no aerial campaign could easily dismantle. The postponement also offered a strategic breathing space for Britain's military leaders. Fighter squadrons could recover and reorganize, supply lines could be reinforced, and new tactics could be tested in preparation for continued aerial engagements. Intelligence services analyzed bombing patterns, refining early warning systems and night fighter deployments. Each day that the German invasion was delayed allowed the Royal Air Force to strengthen its position, improving both the morale of pilots and the confidence of the civilian population. It became increasingly clear that the British people, far from yielding to fear, had become an integral part of the nation's defensive apparatus, embodying a spirit that military planners and historians would later describe as nothing short of extraordinary. In retrospect, October 12 stands as more than just a date on the wartime calendar. It represents the moment when the expectation of rapid German domination collided with the reality of British resilience. The delay of Operation Sea Lion was a testament to the failure of assumptions that underestimated the courage, ingenuity, and unbreakable spirit of a nation. While the skies remained dangerous and the nights filled with uncertainty, the British people had demonstrated that even under the most severe duress, society could adapt, endure, and preserve both life and morale. This day, seemingly quiet on the surface, embodied a profound truth about the nature of resistance, that courage is not always displayed in heroic charges or grand victories, but often in the persistent, unyielding refusal to surrender normalcy, dignity, and hope in the face of relentless adversity. October 12, 1940, therefore, was a day when the world's eyes could witness a remarkable interplay between strategy and spirit, a juncture where human resilience shaped the course of events as much as military tactics. The postponement of invasion was not a triumph of technology or firepower alone, it was a triumph of determination, community, and an unwavering belief in the endurance of everyday life, even when bombs rained from above. As the autumn nights deepened over Britain in 1940, a new and more insidious chapter of warfare unfolded. The German Luftwaffe, having recognized that the skies were not yielding the decisive victory they had hoped for, began to adapt their strategy, turning from direct military confrontation to what they believed would be a war-winning psychological campaign. Inspired by the writings of Italian air theorist Giulio Douhet, German planners pursued a doctrine that had never been tested in the crucible of a modern, industrialized nation at war. The idea that relentless bombing of civilian centers could shatter morale and force surrender. Douhet's principles, laid out in his seminal work The Command of the Air, argued that the destruction of homes, workplaces, and urban infrastructure would lead to chaos within society, eroding faith in government and ultimately compelling the population to demand peace. By early October, this theory was being put into practice over the streets of London, Liverpool, and other major cities. Yet the reality on the ground quickly diverged from the German expectations. The Luftwaffe's nightly raids, with their swarms of Henkel and Dornier bombers, unleashed destruction across residential neighborhoods. Yet instead of generating panic and capitulation, they illuminated the extraordinary resilience of a people determined not to be broken. Families huddled in basement shelters, workers emerged early each morning to clear debris, and communities organized to assist those whose homes had been reduced to rubble. Rather than succumbing to despair, citizens displayed a form of collective defiance. Maintaining routines, reopening businesses, and keeping children in school wherever possible, all while learning to navigate the shattered streets with an almost ritualized calm. The psychological theory underpinning Douhet's strategy seemed elegant on paper, but failed to account for the complex social and cultural fabric of Britain. German planners assumed that fear would translate directly into submission, that terror would corrode the will to resist. Instead, they encountered a population whose sense of identity and community grew stronger under pressure. Newspapers chronicled ordinary acts of courage and ingenuity, from local volunteers organizing emergency response teams to fire brigades improvising methods to combat fires in bombed-out neighborhoods. The British Ministry of Information encouraged a measured stoicism, publishing guidance on everything from how to care for pets in shelters to how to report minor bomb damage, reinforcing a sense of order and continuity in the face of apparent chaos. While the Luftwaffe inflicted physical damage and took lives, the broader psychological effect fell far short of expectations. The scattered nature of the attacks, targeting ports, factories, and neighborhoods in a manner that lacked consistent focus, undermined the intended strategic impact. Bombers carried only limited payloads relative to the size and density of the cities they struck, and high winds, bad weather, and navigational errors further diluted the destructive effect. Instead of terrorizing the population into submission, each raid became an impetus for communal resilience, with neighbors helping one another and local leaders coordinating efforts to keep essential services functioning. The very act of survival became a form of resistance, proving that morale was not simply a matter of bricks and mortar, but of human determination and shared purpose. At the same time, the German High Command clung to the belief that civilian suffering would translate into political leverage. They imagined that overcrowding in bomb shelters, disruption of food supplies, and destruction of homes would produce chaos sufficient to destabilize the government and provoke internal revolt. Yet even as parts of London burned, communities adapted, creating temporary kitchens, emergency shelters, and improvised medical stations, demonstrating that social cohesion could persist even under extreme duress. British intelligence analyzed the results of the bombing campaigns and concluded that the Luftwaffe's efforts were remarkably inefficient, yielding little tangible effect compared to the enormous resources expended. The expectation that terror bombing could act as a decisive instrument of war proved overly simplistic, failing to account for the human capacity for resilience and adaptability. This period also highlighted the interplay between military strategy and civilian endurance, showing that war was no longer confined to the battlefield. The skies above Britain became a theatre not only of aerial combat but also of psychological contest, where the strength of a nation's resolve proved as decisive as any fighter squadron. Communities organized themselves, learning to function with a degree of normality despite the ever-present threat of destruction, and the population says continued engagement with work, education, and daily routines demonstrated that human spirit could not be reduced to a simple variable in a strategic equation. Children learned to navigate blackouts. Parents found ways to preserve routines, and workers returned to bombed factories, all asserting the idea that survival and continuity were forms of defiance in themselves. The narrative of this time is thus not merely one of destruction, but of an unyielding will to live and maintain order in extraordinary circumstances. The Luftwaffe's terror campaign, intended to shatter Britain, inadvertently highlighted the remarkable cohesion and ingenuity of its people, illustrating that morale is not a fragile commodity but a reflection of shared values. Communal responsibility and an unbreakable sense of identity. As Britain endured the Blitz, the failure of Douhet's theory became evident. No amount of destruction could extinguish a society's determination to persevere, and the nightly raids became a testament not to the power of fear, but to the resilience of the human spirit. The skies may have rained bombs, but they could not rain despair, and in this extraordinary endurance lay the foundation for Britain's ultimate resistance. As the nights of 1940 stretched longer and the sound of bombers became a near constant companion above Britain, the people below found ways to navigate life under extraordinary circumstances. Their daily routines a quiet act of defiance against the chaos raining from the skies. In London, Liverpool, and other cities targeted by the Luftwaffe, streets once bustling with ordinary commerce now carried the weight of shattered windows, debris-strewn sidewalks, and the uneasy tension of uncertainty. Yet even amidst such disruption, a remarkable continuity of daily life persisted. Housewives swept the remnants of explosions from doorsteps, and shopkeepers opened their doors to customers with a resolute determination, each act signaling that life, though altered, would not be surrendered to fear. Children, wide and curious, adapted quickly to the strange rhythms of wartime existence, learning to navigate the blackouts and sirens with the help of parents who themselves balanced fear with practicality. They carried their school books to makeshift classrooms, sometimes underground, sometimes in damaged buildings patched together by resourceful teachers and community volunteers. Amid the uncertainty, play still found its way into their days. Improvised games among the rubble or quiet sketches of air raids became a coping mechanism, a subtle assertion that imagination and joy could survive even under the threat of destruction. Communities worked collectively to maintain a semblance of normalcy, forming networks to distribute food, assist those displaced from their homes, and ensure that emergency shelters functioned efficiently, a testament to both ingenuity and shared responsibility. Humor, too, emerged as a vital component of resilience. Newspapers ran tongue-in-cheek campaigns reminding citizens not to be bomb bores, a playful nudge to maintain morale, while conversations in cafes and workplaces often carried a light-hearted edge despite the grim backdrop. Even as buildings shook and sirens wailed, the British people found ways to laugh, to tell stories, and to share small moments of levity that reinforced the strength of community bonds. In a paradoxical way, the ordinary and the extraordinary intertwined. The very act of continuing with mundane tasks, shopping for groceries, walking to work, visiting friends, became a declaration that life would persist, that the human spirit could not be subdued by external force alone. Behind this public perseverance, countless acts of courage unfolded in quiet anonymity. Firefighters navigated crumbling structures to rescue neighbors trapped by falling masonry, while medical personnel treated injuries sustained not only from bombs but from the everyday dangers of a city under siege. Volunteers formed support networks, assisting the elderly, the infirm, and the families who had lost homes in the raids. Even postal workers, delivery drivers, and factory laborers continued their duties with a steadfast resolve, ensuring that essential services and wartime production remained uninterrupted. Each individual contribution, no matter how small, contributed to a larger tapestry of resilience, illustrating that survival during the Blitz was as much about community cohesion as it was about military defense. As night fell and the air grew thick with the drone of approaching aircraft, families gathered in their shelters, listening to the distant explosions while attempting to preserve routines that might seem trivial in peacetime, but were profoundly grounding in wartime. Reading books, playing card games, sharing meals by candlelight. These rituals provided structure and comfort, reinforcing a sense of control amid circumstances that otherwise seemed uncontrollable. The act of maintaining normalcy was not passive. It was a conscious choice, a form of resistance against the psychological aims of terror bombing, which sought to dismantle morale and instill despair. By asserting daily life in these ways, British civilians demonstrated that the human response to fear could be adaptive, inventive, and profoundly communal. Even cultural life adapted to these conditions. Theatre performances, musical concerts, and public lectures continued where possible, often relocated to safer venues or scheduled around air raid warnings. Citizens engaged in intellectual and artistic pursuits not only to maintain personal enrichment but also to signal the persistence of society itself. Humor, creativity, and civic engagement flourished alongside acts of survival, blending to form a resilient identity that defied both physical destruction and psychological pressure. Stories circulated of neighbors sharing news, offering support, and even organizing small celebrations during moments of reprieve, all reinforcing the notion that life, in its essence, could endure. The picture of Britain during the Blitz, therefore, is not solely one of devastation or fear, but of a society asserting its continuity in the face of existential threat. Each step taken along debris-lined streets, each shop reopened, each shared joke amid sheltering neighbors, contributed to a collective narrative of endurance. By weaving daily life into the fabric of wartime experience, British civilians transformed ordinary routines into extraordinary acts of defiance, proving that resilience is cultivated not only through grand gestures or battlefield heroism, but also through the persistent and unyielding effort to preserve humanity, dignity, and connection amidst chaos. In this tapestry of courage, humor, and community, the nation demonstrated that survival under fire is as much about sustaining the rhythms of life as it is about defending the skies above. While Britain endured the nightly terror of the Blitz, half a world away in China, the chaos of war manifested in a different, yet equally complex, form. For years, Chinese forces had struggled to repel the advancing Japanese army, and for a brief period, the nationalists and communists had declared a united front to confront the common enemy. Yet the fragile alliance was more a diplomatic facade than a reflection of genuine cohesion, and in the autumn of 1940, this tension erupted violently at Huangqiao in Jiangsu province. The battle there was not against a foreign invader but between compatriots, a stark reminder that even in the midst of existential threat, old divisions and rivalries could not simply be suspended. The origins of the conflict traced back months earlier, when communist forces under the leadership of Su Yu had moved to pressure nationalist General Han Dikun. Their maneuvers included strategic crossings of the Yangtze River and calculated strikes against smaller nationalist units. designed both to weaken resistance and to assert communist authority in contested regions. The nationalists responded with varying degrees of success, conducting attacks that ranged from small-scale skirmishes to larger coordinated operations, each engagement exposing the cracks in their purported unity. By early October, the stage was set for a decisive confrontation at Huangqiao, where the ambitions and strategies of both sides collided with devastating consequences. On the 4th of October, as nationalist forces advanced, they were met by an ambush from the communists that shattered their formations. Units that had expected a routine engagement found themselves routed, with officers falling in combat or, in some cases, taking their own lives in despair over the failure. The fighting was brutal yet precise. The communist forces, smaller in number, demonstrated remarkable discipline and tactical acumen. Exploiting terrain, timing, and intelligence to maximize their impact. By the following day, the battle escalated into a multi-columned assault, with communist troops targeting key elements of the nationalist corps. The outcome was stark. Thousands of nationalist soldiers were killed or captured. Weapons and artillery fell into communist hands, and entire regiments were effectively neutralized. The tactical victory was decisive, yet it came at a cost of human life and a reinforcement of the bitter mistrust that had long defined relations between the two factions. Despite the intensity of the fighting, both sides sought to suppress reports of the battle, mindful that the world and their own populations expected them to present a united front against Japan. Newspapers and official communications downplayed the internal conflict, framing actions in neutral or ambiguous terms, while behind the scenes, commanders analyzed the engagement for lessons in leadership, morale, and the coordination of forces under constrained circumstances. The battle revealed that unity in the face of a common enemy is not guaranteed simply by decree. It must be actively nurtured through trust, communication, and shared purpose, elements that were in short supply between nationalist and communist leaders. This internal conflict had broader implications for the war against Japan. Resources that might have been directed toward resisting invasion were diverted into internecine clashes, weakening positions and creating vulnerabilities that the Japanese could exploit elsewhere. Moreover, the human toll of these battles deepened existing grievances, entrenching animosities that would influence political and military decisions long after the guns fell silent. The engagement at Huangqiao, while a localized event, thus reflected a recurring theme in wartime China, that the struggle for national survival was inextricably entwined with struggles for power, legitimacy, and control among Chinese factions themselves. Amid the strategy, tactics, and political calculations, there existed the human element: soldiers on both sides who faced exhaustion, fear, and the moral complexity of fighting fellow countrymen. Accounts from the period speak of villages caught between armies, civilians navigating shifting front lines, and families displaced by the violence, all attempting to continue lives interrupted by conflict. The battle was as much about navigating human relationships, loyalties, and uncertainties as it was about capturing territory or destroying enemy formations. In this context, the clash at Huangqiao becomes more than a military episode. It serves as a lens into the challenges of leadership, the consequences of fragmented alliances, and the profound difficulties of sustaining unity under the pressures of total war. Even as the battle concluded with communist forces consolidating control over key areas and nationalist units retreating in disarray, the underlying tensions remained unresolved. The so-called United Front against Japan was a fragile construct, constantly tested by local ambitions, historical rivalries, and the practical realities of warfare. The events at Huangqiao thus underscore the paradox of wartime collaboration, that nations under siege can be simultaneously united and divided, and that survival often depends not only on external resistance, but also on the ability to manage internal conflict. In examining these clashes, historians and strategists alike gain insight into the broader dynamics of civil-military relations, the challenges of coalition warfare, and the enduring impact of human agency amid the machinery of war. Ultimately, the Battle of Huangqiao is a story of complexity, illustrating that in a nation facing invasion, the front lines are not always external. They can be drawn within communities, between leaders, and even within the hearts of those who fight. It demonstrates that the path to national survival is rarely linear, that courage and strategy must coexist with diplomacy and trust, and that the human dimension of warfare, loyalties, rivalries, and moral choices can be as decisive as the might of any army. In the shadow of global conflict, the struggle at Huangqiao reminds us that the true enemy is often intertwined with the challenges of unity, cooperation, and understanding among those who share a homeland. As the events of October 1940 unfolded across continents, the global reach of the conflict became strikingly evident, reminding the world that war was not confined to a single battlefield or a single front. In the Mediterranean, the waters near Cape Passero became a theater of skill, courage, and strategy, where the British light cruiser Ajax faced the daunting challenge of engaging multiple Italian vessels. On the 12th of October, Ajax first confronted 3 Italian torpedo boats, using both precision and daring to neutralize 2 of them while allowing 1 to escape. The engagement did not end there. Later, 4 Italian destroyers appeared on the horizon, their guns blazing, and the battle intensified. Ajax's crew, seasoned by previous encounters and guided by disciplined command, inflicted heavy damage on the enemy, demonstrating that even in a war dominated by global strategy and industrial might, the courage and ingenuity of individual sailors could alter the course of engagements. In the hours that followed, one of the damaged destroyers was sunk by the British cruiser York, highlighting the seamless coordination and persistence of the Royal Navy even in high-stakes confrontations. These actions, though smaller in scale compared to the massive aerial campaigns over Britain or the sprawling battles in China, were no less critical in shaping the trajectory of the war. Each skirmish, each maneuver, rippled outward, influencing supply lines, morale, and strategic calculations across continents. Meanwhile, on the European mainland, the shadow of German expansion extended into Romania, where troops entered under the pretext of reorganizing the Romanian army. The true aim was far more strategic: to secure vital oilfields crucial for sustaining the German war machine. Oil was the lifeblood of mechanized warfare, powering tanks, aircraft, and naval vessels alike, and control over Romania's reserves offered Germany not just resources but leverage in shaping alliances and influencing neighboring states. This maneuver demonstrated the interconnectedness of global conflict, where political control, economic resources, and military operations were inseparable, and where a move in one region could have cascading effects elsewhere. Romania, its sovereignty compromised, became another node in the intricate web of strategic calculations, reminding the world that even small nations were enmeshed in decisions that could affect the outcome of the global struggle. Simultaneously, in France, the political landscape shifted under the leadership of Philippe Pétain. As head of Vichy France, Pétain broadcasted to the French population, urging them to abandon traditional notions of who were friends and enemies, further aligning the country with German interests. This move reflected the pressures and compromises faced by nations under occupation or threat, and it underscored the moral and political complexities inherent in wartime leadership. For the citizens of France, it was a moment of reckoning, as loyalties were tested, identities challenged, and the lines between survival and complicity blurred. Petain's pronouncements were a stark illustration of how war reshaped societies, not only through the devastation of cities and the losses of soldiers but also through the difficult, often divisive decisions imposed on civilian populations and national leaders alike. Taken together, these events, the naval confrontation at Cape Passero, the German advance into Romania, and Vichy France's political alignment, paint a vivid portrait of a world at war on multiple fronts, each interwoven with the others. They remind us that wartime actions are rarely isolated. Each decision, each battle, whether at sea, in the air, or on the land, contributes to a larger narrative of strategy, survival, and human resilience. In Britain, civilians continued to maintain normalcy amidst nightly bombings, navigating both fear and uncertainty with humor and determination. In China, internal divisions complicated the fight against a common enemy, revealing that the path to survival was fraught with both external threats and internal strife. Across Europe and the Mediterranean, the interconnectedness of political maneuvering, resource security, and military engagements underscored the complexity of a conflict that spanned oceans and continents. As we reflect on these intertwined stories, a clear lesson emerges. War is not solely the domain of generals, tanks, and aircraft. It is equally the domain of civilians, sailors, and ordinary people whose choices, endurance, and resilience shape outcomes in ways that often go unseen. The courage of those aboard Ajax, the steadfastness of British citizens during the Blitz, and the strategic calculations in Romania and Vichy France all illustrate that history is crafted not only by plans on maps but by human agency, morality, and adaptability in the face of immense challenges. It is a reminder that while war imposes suffering and destruction, it also reveals the extraordinary capacities of individuals and communities to confront adversity with resourcefulness and courage, to maintain dignity under pressure, and to assert humanity in the midst of inhumanity. Thank you for joining us on this journey through a pivotal week in October 1940, as we explored battles in the skies, on the seas, and across distant lands, uncovering stories of strategy, resilience, and human fortitude. If you found this exploration of history insightful, please make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel, so you won't miss future stories that illuminate the courage, complexity, and enduring spirit of people who shaped the world during times of conflict. Together, we continue to learn from the past, drawing lessons of perseverance, strategy, and humanity that resonate far beyond the battlefield.